Now, shifting focus to the other big talking point, US President Donald Trump suggested that Ukraine was in fact responsible for Russia's invasion of the country 3 years ago, arguing Kyiv could have made a deal to avoid the conflict. On the flip side, we also heard from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressing concerns over not being included in the talks between US and Russia, which is taking place in Saudi Arabia. Both US and Russia agreed in high-level talks to re-establish embassy staffing, diverging from previous American policy on the matter. Meanwhile, Zelensky was also seen lashing out at the Trump administration negotiation tactics and in a retort that now delayed his trip to the Saudi until March 10th. Now, in a bid to bring peace between Russia and Ukraine, foreign ministry leaders met in Saudi Arabia. And in fact, Russia's chief foreign policy advisor said that the talks were positive. He also mentioned that the separate teams of Russian and US negotiators will begin contacts on Ukraine in due time. Remember that earlier, the Kremlin reassured that Putin will be ready to negotiate with Zelensky soon. Meanwhile, Zelensky, while addressing reporters at the Turkey event, said that he cancelled plans to go to Saudi Arabia. Now, the visit stands postponed till March. My colleague Sumita Khari joins in with more details on that.
United States and Russian officials met in Saudi Arabia without Kiev at the table. In fact, this is one of the most high-profile talks that has happened since the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine 3 years back. This is a significant step in putting an end to the war. However, the big question is, can it, given there's been an exclusion of leaders from Europe and most importantly Ukraine, which is a key stakeholder, and Ukraine has made it clear as well that no peace agreement can be reached without its participation. Now, in the aftermath of these talks, in fact, Marco Rubio, who's the Secretary of State, has reportedly said that they will appoint a high-level team to work and negotiate and work through the conflict with Ukraine in a way that is acceptable to all the parties engaged. He also said that this actually needs to be a permanent end to the war, not just a temporary one. And there will be discussions on territory and security guarantees. Remember, it's European leaders who've been rather concerned about the talks which seemingly exclude Ukraine. So the European leaders are concerned about security issues with respect to these peace deal talks. In fact, the Kremlin has also stated, which could be seen as a positive development, that Putin himself has said that he will be ready to negotiate with Zelensky if necessary, but the legal basis of agreements, and that needs discussion considering the reality. They said that Zelensky's legitimacy can be questioned. And overall, these talks, well, Russia has stated that these discussions would focus on ending the war and, of course, restoring this entire complex of Russia-US ties. Remember, US has shifted its strategy towards Russia, that's seeking more direct engagement, while the Biden administration was more cautious in its approach and it refrained from a public engagement with Russia.
All right. Thanks very much, Sumita, for all those details on that. But then let's go across and listen in to US Secchi's post-day one of Russia-US talks. What did he have to say on this?
Well, I would start by saying we've agreed on 4 principles that I think are important. The first is that we're going to appoint our teams respectively that have worked very quickly to reestablish the functionality of our respective missions in Washington and in Moscow. For us to be able to continue to move down this road, we need to have diplomatic facilities that are operating and functioning normally. The second point is that we're going to appoint a high-level team from our end to help negotiate and work through the end of the conflict in Ukraine in a way that's enduring and acceptable to all the parties engaged. The third point is to begin to work at a high level as well to begin to discuss and think about and examine both the geopolitical and economic cooperation that could result from an end to the conflict in Ukraine. Obviously, we'd have to see that conflict come to a successful and enduring end in order for that to be possible. And the last thing we agreed to is that while our teams are going to be working on all of this, the 4 of us who were here today, the 5 of us that were here today, are going to remain engaged in this process to make sure that it's moving along in a productive way.
All right. Now, moving on from geopolitics to macros, then home builder sentiment in the United States has plunged to a 5-month low in the month of February. And this is amid flaring worries that import tariffs would join lofty mortgage rates in pushing up the housing costs. The housing index plunged 5 points in February. That's the lowest reading since September of last year, erasing almost most of the gains post Donald Trump's election victory, which happened in November. Moving on, turning our attention towards the Federal Reserve now. The San Francisco Federal Reserve Bank President Mary Daly has said that while there is no reason to be discouraged about the bumpy and sometimes imperceptible progress towards the 2% inflation, the central bank should keep short-term borrowing costs where they are until the progress is more visible. In her comments, she reiterates the importance of a solid labor market and even economy, but sees merit in being careful towards future rate adjustments. Now, let's get you some more key development which happened in terms of the share movement. Intel shares rallied as much as 16.1% following the reports that both Broadcom and TSMC are potentially weighing bids that could result in splitting the embattled chip maker. Now, the stock, in fact, notched its best day since March 2020. Reports are now suggesting that Broadcom may consider a play for the company's chip design as well as the marketing segment, while TSMC is interested in a stake or complete control of Intel's factories. No bids have been filed and talks are reportedly still informal in nature. All right.